Welcome back to another Energy 101 episode. You are here with three of the women from Digital Wildcatters. This is your one-stop shop for all the dumb questions that you may be afraid to ask about the energy industry. I am Sydney. I am joined by Misty and Julie. And today's guest of honor is Deborah Sacre from Auburn Energy. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a little rundown of your background and what you do for Auburn?
Well, I am Auburn. It's a company of one.
Perfect.
I have
Love
been
it.
out on my own in consulting in the oil industry for over 30 years.
Wow.
But I went to the University of Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner.
I thought you were going to say Auburn.
No. Everyone thinks it's for hair color. And I know,
Got it.
Surely, but surely I'm going pink instead of Auburn, but that's okay. I get
That's
re-Auburn
fun.
next week. I went to the University of Oklahoma and got a degree in geology.
Awesome.
And promptly went out and started working for a large major at the time, which was Gulf Oil, in the late 70s. So do the math. I just turned 70 years old. And since then, I've worked for major companies, minor companies, small companies, and finally, I just said to heck with it, and I went out on my own.
Good for you.
Mhm.
And I started Oklahoma City, did a stint in Dallas, and then moved my way down to Houston.
We just visited Oklahoma City for the first time last week for one of our events, and it was lovely.
It's
We
a
had the
cool
best
city.
time.
Now, you probably went to Bricktown, right? Did you go to Bricktown while you were, or in downtown? Were you in downtown?
A
Oklahoma
little
City?
bit. So our event was in Uptown, I think, kind of like a little quirky area. It
Mhm.
was great. We stayed nearby, and then we kind of bopped around town when we had some downtime, but all of us were very pleasantly surprised about how great it was, and now we all can't wait to go back.
Well, I'll be going in October because I'm giving a talk at a convention up there.
Nice.
So on machine learning.
Oh,
Gosh.
perfect.
Mhm.
So it's been one of those ups and downs. The industry has its
Mhm.
good points and bad points, but
Yeah.
I've survived. And about 7 years ago, well, we built a house out in the country,
Mhm.
and I put my office out there in the house. We moved 3 days before Hurricane Harvey.
Oh,
Whoa.
wow.
That was real fun.
Yeah.
So, but that's
Were you out? So you were out of Houston.
we were
the main
we
area?
had 4 moving trucks, 450 boxes, a piano mover, and they were checking the generator literally when it started raining.
Wow.
Oh,
my
man.
So fortunately, the house we had here in town didn't flood,
Good.
although the
Good,
people were
good.
lucky.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But man, we had to come back into the office. We'd been in the same office space. My husband and I share an office, and we haven't killed each other yet, which is pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
But we had some stuff left in the office, and we were making trips back and forth to pull out the last of the stuff from the office, and it was pretty grim.
Wow.
I bet.
So,
Oof.
but I love what I do. So,
Right.
Mhm.
Well, then let's dive into it.
Yeah. So let's start with, first of all, the first question, an introduction to seismic data. What is it? And why is it important to energy?
well, that's a really good question. So basically, seismic data is what geologists and geophysicists use to image the Earth.
Mhm.
And what they do is it's basically sound waves that they send into the Earth that bounce off different layers of rock. And if it's really hard rock, it bounces and gives you one kind of signal. And if it's really soft rock, it kind of slowly bounces and gives you another kind of signal. But it's when they accumulate all those signals and put them back together in processing that you have a visual image of the layers of rock in the Earth. Kind of like sonar would be
Right.
bouncing off of things in the ocean.
Mhm.
The sound waves, the energy that they put into the Earth, and they can do it through different means. In the ocean, they use what they call air guns,
Mhm.
which send a big booming kind of reflection down into the ocean. On land, they use big vibra-sized trucks that have a plate that goes down on the ground and sends a big vibration into the ground.
So
And-
interesting.
And then they can use dynamite. They drill little holes, they
Oh.
throw dynamite charges in and blow it up, and then that sends a signal down into the ground. So there's many different ways of collecting the information.
Is that wireline? Like, does wireline usually send that?
No.
Is that who gets the seismic data?
No,
that's
no.
completely different.
We have, well, there's power sources, and then they have receivers.
Got it.
So they put these out in an array on the ground. And the power source, of course, sends the signal then
Mhm.
to the ground, and the receivers pick up the signal as it's coming back out.
Okay.
And it comes out in waves. because it's going deeper and deeper and deeper and bouncing off different layers of rock. So they're constantly recording and picking it all up, much like when you see an earthquake, the little needle that goes back and
Mhm.
forth. Well, this is a sound recorder that's picking up vibrations coming back from the earth, and it's processed, and then it comes out. What in the old days, it came out on paper, and we'd have to look at all these little wiggly lines, kind of like a.
It's like another language,
I can like
Yeah.
picture
right?
it coming
Well,
out
you
like
know,
an EKG machine.
It would be
right?
very similar,
Yeah.
or the earthquake things. But imagine if you're recording an earthquake and it just keeps happening and happening and happening. That's what we would look at, and we'd interpret that and understand based on wells that have been drilled. We could
Mhm.
tie back and correlate the signals to specific formations in the earth, and that's how we're able to map the subsurface. So without seismic data, we really would have stopped finding a lot of oil and gas years and years and years ago.
Mm.
That was
But-
going to be my question. So typically the importance of using seismic data is traditionally to find where oil is.
Oil and gas.
Great.
And there's in the state of Texas, there's been somewhere over 2 million wells drilled.
Jeez.
But
That's
the state of
crazy.
Texas is so big, there are
Yeah.
huge expanses where there's no well information.
Mm-hmm.
So the seismic is basically your interpolation between well control, which is your hard data.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's in the well,
Right.
because you've got the layers of rock.
Right.
But you are having to guess what's happening between this well and this well and this well. And seismic helps us do that.
Great.
Got it. So do
Interesting.
you usually start the process of drilling with seismic data? Like you have to have that first layer, going to a geologist, tell me what's underground.
Right. Well, and that's where the roles between geologists and geophysicists have started to merge.
Oh.
Before seismic, it was the geologist who was doing the mapping, who was interpolating what they were seeing in the wells.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When seismic came along, the geophysicist, which is the person who learned how to read all the signals,
Right.
started making their version of maps. And of course, when you send a signal into the earth and comes back, they measure it in time. Wells are measured in depth. So for a long time, it was hard for them to take the time maps and make sense of them to correlate to the depth maps. And so over the years, the geologist's role and the geophysicist's role have kind of merged to where now we just kind of use the term geoscientist
Right.
to combine both of them. My degree may be in geology, but most of my career I've worked in the geophysical side,
Right.
interpreting the seismic data.
This is perfect
Mm.
timing because we have a podcast right after this that is more of a general geology, geoscience 101. So these are
Mhm.
going to be
Yeah.
perfectly paired.
Mhm.
Cool.
So I feel like this might be our first dumb question. When you're capturing seismic data, what exactly goes into the earth? Is it? I'm picturing it like a laser.
No, it's like sonar.
So it's a sound
It's sound.
or like a vibration.
Yes,
vibration,
It's
yeah.
that's it.
Is it a big
Mm.
machine?
Well, that's where the vibrosize
Yeah.
machine or
Okay.
the dynamite.
Okay.
And in my world, there
Dynamite,
are
yeah.
no dumb questions or only dumb answers. So feel like that you can ask me anything, and I'll let you know if I think it's a dumb answer.
Maybe we can find a good graphic of what the machine looks like.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
Well,
they roll it out and
it's a
turn
big
around
big
and-
truck.
okay.
It's a huge, massive truck that probably weighs 40,000 pounds.
Wow.
And they put this big, thick steel metal plate on the ground to the extent that it pulls the truck up. It's literally supporting itself on this plate
Mhm.
Mhm.
so that they have all the weight and the force of that truck when it sends its signal, and it sends out signals in decibels
Mhm.
or in hertz, much like what you guys are doing in recording. When
Right.
you're looking at the sound,
Mm.
you know the decibels, you know the hertz. It's that
Mm.
kind of information that's going into the ground and coming out and being recorded. And they put the recordings on these massive tapes, much like a videotape would
Mhm.
be.
Mm.
And then they process it.
Yeah.
And the processing is what brings the squiggles to light.
Mhm.
So in the past, like what are some of the common challenges besides like the geophysicists, geologists, like that misinterpretation of the different types of data? Are there any other common like struggles whenever you're trying to read the data or gather the data? And it's very interesting that you've been in the industry since the 70s, because I'm sure it's changed a lot.
Massive,
So
massive.
it'd be interesting to go back into the past and like, what was it like then? Like, how hard was it?
It's one of those things that as you get older, you look at someone and you say, I never want to be that age again. I never want to go back to what we had to do
Right.
when we were working, in the 70s and 80s. One of the biggest things and which really revolutionized the industry is when they first started acquiring seismic data, they only acquired it along a straight line.
Mm.
They would put rows of they would put receivers and out and power sources out, and they collected it in one straight line,
Interesting.
which is good unless you want to know what's on this side of the line. Or
Yeah.
what's on this side of the line.
Right. It's a lot more ground to cover.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot more ground to cover. And so I want to say about the mid 80s, the big companies like Exxon and Chevron started experimenting with what would happen if we laid rows and rows and rows and rows of straight line out
Mhm.
and then processed it all together.
Mhm.
And that became three-dimensional seismic.
Mm.
So now you're not looking at just a slice of the earth, you're looking at a cube of the earth.
Mhm.
And that helped us. I mean, it revolutionized and changed the industry all over the world when we could see now in three dimensions instead of
Mhm.
2 dimensions.
That seems like it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
It's a darn big
Yeah.
deal. And then in the 90s, so at first only the big companies could afford to do that. So they held all the licenses for the big 3Ds they were shooting, including marine.
Mhm.
And then in the 90s, the technology improved so much that the little guys started getting hold of 3Ds and doing their own thing. And so now, when you're putting a prospect together and you're trying to convince people that you want to drill a well, if you basically don't have seismic to show or a 3D
Right.
on how you triangulated all the well information in, then you're not going to be able to get your well drilled
Right.
because everyone's used to that technology now.
Exactly. Yeah, that kind of leads into kind of the second part of our discussion in seismic data. Now that we're kind of in this digital age, you touched on it before, how much like what's it called? An EKG?
Artificial
Is it an EKG? The
EKG,
heart monitor?
Yeah.
So much like an EKG machine, I'm picturing it back in the old days, printing out paper, just a ton of lines
Right.
that someone would
Right.
physically have. So nowadays, I'm assuming it is all digital on
All
a
digital
computer.
on the computer. I've got 3 screens. It looks like the
Mhm.
control board to the USS Enterprise in my office.
Right.
But and one reason why I do bifocals instead of where they transition
Mhm.
is because when you have the transitional ones, you lose your peripheral vision. So bifocals, because I'm looking at what's going on this screen, what's going on this screen, and what's going on this screen,
Oh.
I like to keep my peripheral vision
Right.
as precise as I can. I just a little nuance to throw in there, but
Mm-hmm.
but no, it's all digital, and you sit there in front of a workstation and look at squigglies all day long.
All day.
Color, I
Right.
like to look mine in color, and that's where the machine learning part of it's come in, because the machine learning is definitely in color,
Right.
because you're picking up all these different patterns in the earth, and you want your eyes to pick up on unique patterns, so it's all in color.
So speaking of machine learning, before we dive into how seismic data is leaning into machine learning now, you gave us a great example of what machine learning is. Can you repeat that? From
Well,
Amazon?
we live with artificial intelligence.
Right.
All of now, every day. And a good example of, so machine learning, you have a training data set
Mhm.
that the machine learns from. Okay. And then when it learns from that training data set, it can go out and do different things to enhance that training data set. So a good example that I mentioned earlier is you buy something on Amazon. Okay. And so later on, you're cruising through the internet and a pop-up ad comes in, and gosh, it's the thing that you just bought. Or people who bought this also bought this. Okay, so you become the training data set.
Those get me every time.
You become the training data set for Amazon.
Mhm.
They're learning what you like, what you like color-wise, or what you like cooking wise. I mean, I make a mistake of going to All-Clad and buying a pot. The next thing I know, every cooking device in the world comes up on my
Yep.
computer.
Right.
Yep.
So that's a really good example of how our everyday lives are affected by machine learning and artificial intelligence. So now we're taking that training data set and making a 3D the training data set and having the machine go in and see things inside that seismic data that our eyes and our brains are not picking up.
Mhm.
Right.
And that's a huge enhancement, another great technology change.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
When did that start shifting?
Gosh, well, of course, machine learning's been around for a long time and
Mhm.
AI's been around a long time, especially in like the medical industry
Right.
or Wall Street. Pattern recognition, cluster
Yep.
analysis, all that kind of stuff's been there for a long time. It really has only been applied um, to the extent that we're using it now in the seismic data industry,
Mhm.
probably for the last 15 years.
Okay.
And it's being slow to catch on because people are going, well, I've been doing it this way for 40 years.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I want to switch over and do it this way.
I'm sure the
Mhm.
people that were reading the physical papers said the same thing when it
Mhm.
was all going
Yes.
digital.
Oh, most assuredly. So it's been a slow to adopt kind of
Mhm.
technology. But in my world, or what I say to people is I say, look, all the easy stuff has been found.
Mhm.
We've got seismic literally covering the world. And people have hammered over the same 3Ds for 20 years, trying in their brains to see something new. You're going to have to apply a new technology to be able to see anything new.
Mhm.
Right.
And
That's a good point.
That is a good
Mhm.
point.
I mean, that's where we're
Mhm.
coming.
Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of people ask me, well, if machine learning is so good and it's helping you find out oil and gas that much easier, will it replace the geologist or geophysicist? And a lot of people can be replaced by machine learning.
Right.
I mean, look at robotics and all the automation they're doing in the oil
Mhm.
field. And that would be
Mhm.
another really good podcast
Yeah.
Mhm.
for you guys. But you still have to interpret what the computer gives you.
Mhm.
Right.
Still
And
has
so-
brains
Yeah.
behind it.
So you have to have a knowledge of the subsurface, which the machines don't. They're just giving you colors and patterns.
Right.
Mhm.
They don't know what it means.
Right.
You have to understand what it means. And you're tying
Mhm.
into all the well information too.
Right.
So you still have the upper hand when it comes to the machine learning in the seismic world.
I feel
Mhm.
like we hear that a lot right now with AI. AI has just hit it like a huge bubble. Like everyone's talking about AI and everybody's worried about their jobs getting taken. But I look at it as enhancing.
Mhm.
You're like, you can put out so much more with the help of AI.
Right.
And I'm sure it's the same way. You can just do your job better
Yeah.
and more
Mhm.
efficiently. So you have more time to do other things.
Well, when the computer's cranking on something in my office, I go in and put on a pot of soup. I mean,
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
we're multitaskers.
Yes.
So no, you're totally right there. But again, the machine doesn't know anything except what it's coming back with information.
Right.
And it's up to the humans
Mhm.
to understand what that information means and how
Right.
to apply it.
Right.
Are there challenges with the accuracy of it, or once it kind of gets rolling and it's testing, the test group of the data is there? Obviously, I'm assuming the person on the other side that's interpreting it is giving feedback, hey, this might not be accurate. But are there ever concerns with that? How is that proactively? What's the word I'm looking for? I'm assuming when they give the training data set, is it already accurate? So
Yeah,
Reliable.
reliability.
That's a real excellent question. Because and I'll show this in some of my slides in the PowerPoint later on. But so the stuff that I'm doing,
Mhm.
I'm looking at timing. Okay, so seismic data comes back to you in time. How much time does it take to go down to this reflector and bounce back? Okay,
Mhm.
so for 60 years, we have been interpreting in the time domain.
Mhm.
And it's been okay, you have a wiggle that goes this way, which means a hard rock, and a wiggle that goes this way, which means a soft rock, and a wiggle that goes this way. But we know that there's a lot of stuff happening between the two pieces of hard rock.
Mhm.
And now with the machine learning, we're breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces.
Mhm.
Statistically, the computer can do that. Our eyes cannot.
Can't, right?
Mhm.
So now we're seeing finer and finer detail that we've never been able to image before. And so the the problems arise with the well calibration. Okay.
Okay.
When you're looking at just a wiggle going this way and a wiggle going this way and a wiggle going this way, and you've got a well right here, you've got a lot of slop.
Right.
But when you start breaking down Mother Nature into very concise beds,
Mhm.
then the tie of the time to the depth has to be very accurate.
Mhm.
And if you're not tied to the well accurately, then you can misinterpret what the patterns mean and
Gotcha.
and lose what could be a good oil and gas
Right.
opportunity into something that may be a wet sand or something like that. So
Right.
so the critical point when you're dividing the time up into smaller increments statistically is how accurate are your well ties.
Right.
And the change of rocks, the change from say sandstone to shale to limestone to sandstone, all create what they call velocity variances in the ground because the signal will go through a limestone much faster than it will
Mhm.
go through a gas-prone sandstone.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
So a good way to test how we see gas, okay? The next time you have a chance, get a really nice crystal glass and fill it with water. And then use a fork on it to hear the sound. Ding, ding,
Mhm.
ding, ding.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Then drop an Alka-Seltzer in there. Give it about 15 or 20 seconds and then hit that ting again and it'll go thud, 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 thud.
Wow.
It
We should do
changes.
that.
We should do
No,
that.
it's very, I do this, for when I speak at like junior highs or for kids or something like that.
Like for us right now.
No. But it's and I was doing that experiment one time, and a guy in the audience said, "Well, that's how I tell my Scotch and soda from my Scotch and water." I'm going, "Well, I've never tried it with Scotch,
Yeah.
but Alka-Seltzer works really great, but
Interesting.
it changes the sound in the rock, and that's how we interpret.
That is very
We
interesting.
interpret
Mhm.
that when it's processed and comes back to us, we can see that change in velocity. We can see that change from the ting to the thud,
Right.
the
Mm.
difference between a wet sand and a gas sand.
I have a side
Mm.
note really quick. I feel like geologists don't get enough credit for
Mhm.
how cool their job is. Like you hear, I don't know, astronauts, they're exploring something that we
Right.
can't see.
They're out in
Same
space.
in the ocean. Like you're exploring something, but like geologists don't get that same like your job is so cool. You're literally discovering things that we can't see and identifying it.
And
like
it's so
just
important.
it is.
Well, and I'm glad to hear you say that because the industry is being vilified in the media.
Mhm.
And don't get me on my politics and don't start me down the road of climate. One thing as a geologist that you learn in school is you're studying the earth, and you're studying the earth from the time it was formed up to where you are now.
Right.
So the earth has many different cycles, and we're constantly going through cycles. The human lifespan, if you look at the earth, the existence of the earth as a 24-hour clock, humans have been on the earth the last 4 seconds of the 24 hours.
That's crazy.
So our perception and
Right.
our understanding of the scale
Mhm.
of the earth and what it's gone through in 4.5 billion years,
Yes.
and we've been around for 4 million years, that's kind of the scale that you're looking at. So for us to believe that, oh my God, 30 years ago it was this and 30 years from now it's going to be this is probably not correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's a matter of scale,
Yeah.
just like anything else.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like reading an 8-point font or a 72-point font. Okay.
Right.
So
Wow.
Well, I know you brought some slides for us.
I
So for all of
did.
our listeners, make sure if you have a chance, check out the YouTube video. We will be sure to stitch them in so you guys know what we're talking about as we go through some of them.
yeah.
Let's
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is machine learning, and there's different kinds of machine learning. There's the kind where you have, you have an endpoint here, and you want to get to an endpoint here. Well, this is your solution.
Right.
This is your beginning, and so you bounce back and forth with machine learning in an algorithm, a mathematical algorithm, until a machine learning agrees with your conclusion. Now, that's not what I use. I use a machine learning called self-organizing maps,
Okay.
okay? Which the first kind of machine learning is what they call supervised. you're supervising how it's working along, and you make sure that it gets to your endpoint. Okay.
Mm.
What I'm using is called unsupervised. I don't know what's down on the ground.
Right.
I want the
Mhm.
computer to come back and tell me what's down there.
Right.
People go in with preconceived ideas as to what Mother Nature has.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like solving a puzzle. Trying to figure out geology is like solving a huge puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And you're having to put all these pieces of information together in order to hit bingo,
Right.
in order to
Mhm.
get that last piece in and see the jigsaw fully complete. So I use a form of machine learning called unsupervised, where there are no constraints. It just you send it down, you turn it loose on a 3-dimensional seismic cube of the earth, and it comes back and tells you here are all the patterns. What are you going to do with them?
Right.
Mhm.
So the machine learning technology I've been using for about 12 years. Uh, it was started, and I think I have a red, well, the red circle's kind of moved little bit, but self-organizing maps is what that red circle's supposed to
Okay.
be around. Of what I focus on and where I have found much success
Okay.
Mhm.
was started kind of by a gentleman by the name of by the name of Tuvo Kahonen. So
Mhm.
that kind of explains when your clientele look at this, they can look at the different kinds of machine learning that are out there. The self-organizing maps is the best one in my mind when it's applied to seismic data.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tuvo Kahonen started playing around in the 80s with organizing information, okay, and doing it on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So if you were to imagine, say, you've got a file drawer, and inside that file drawer is a bunch of folders. You have organized information into those folders that is similar. So all your electric bills are in one folder, all your water bills are in a folder, all your insurance payments are in a folder. So each folder contains similar information. Well, he started playing around with that back in the 80s, and he went to the UN and he said, give me 39 different quality of life statistics: average age, average income, average education on 130 some odd countries around the world. And he wanted to try to organize all that information so that statistically he could see the countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next slide, and
Mhm.
there's that first slide is the list of all the countries. So the next slide, and I have to thank Dr. Tom Smith for this slide, is basically a picture of what we call the topology, or a self-organized map, a 2D map. That's the map of all the colors.
Mhm.
And then you see the map of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the map of the world is the different colors correspond to the colors in the 2D color map. So you can see in yellow that the US and Canada have very similar statistical information about their population. And so what I'm doing in the seismic world is I'm doing the same thing. I'm breaking the seismic information down into colors or patterns.
Mhm.
And then I can turn on and turn off any of those patterns and see where in my seismic data those patterns exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple, but it's very powerful to
Yeah.
take. And you can do this in an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I don't know Excel well enough to put the mathematics together, so I let the machine do it.
Right.
But it started out as basically an Excel spreadsheet. And now it's to where it's part of a huge algorithm in software, and you say, read this information, do your magic to it, organize the
Mhm.
data,
Mhm.
and then give me another volume in color with all the data organized.
Mhm.
So this next example I have is how we're breaking it down. Okay, so instead of looking, like I said earlier, the wiggle going this way and the wiggle going that way, we're breaking it down into very small time increments, which gives us statistically a lot more information about the subsurface.
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide. And we're looking at different ways of breaking down the signal. So these are called seismic attributes. And in 1979, they took the recording, the seismic recording, and they started splitting it out into different components. Kind of like taking a satellite picture and breaking it out into various frequencies or rays or colors. I mean, we're seeing the total color spectrum with our eyes,
Right.
but we know we can break that color spectrum down into blues, greens, yellows, and oranges,
Right.
and then colors we can't see.
Mhm.
The same thing happens in sound. Okay, you can have ultra high frequencies that you can't hear, but dogs can,
Right.
Mhm.
or then you have ultra low frequencies, which rattle your whole body when you hear them.
Mhm.
So we're breaking down the sound signal into different components, different waves,
Mhm.
and each one of those different components tells us a little something different in the earth.
Mm.
So we call them seismic attributes. They're all split from the main seismic that was recorded, but we're just breaking it into different frequencies and different signals.
Mhm.
So this next slide is when it comes back to us. It comes back to us in the form of color, and I put a wiggle trace or a seismic trace over it, so you can see how much detail we can see in the subsurface now that we couldn't see in the regular recording.
Right.
And I think this first example
Ooh.
at top, okay, is the seismic when we're on our workstations. The orange and black, and people use different colors, but basically it's a range of orange, black, and white. That's what we interpret. That's what we've interpreted for the last 50, 60
Mhm.
years, okay? And we know that we can see hard rock and soft rock, but we can't see the details where there's a channel, what the bottom of the channel looks like, what the top of the channel looks like. We can't see all these different geologic features. Well, now with the machine learning, that's the same picture, just broken out into different
That's
statistical.
wild.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A lot more data.
And so,
Yeah.
so in this particular example, I am tying to a well, and it's kind of hard to see from here, but there's a little red flag in the middle of that well where they perforated and produced oil.
Mhm.
And that well made 400,000 barrels of oil in its lifetime.
Wow.
So a correct tie is to that yellow pattern,
Right.
right? So if you go to the next slide, I can go in now that the yellow
So
is actually
pretty.
I
pink.
know.
Fuchsia. So now I can go in, just like the Cajonan example, and I can turn off all the patterns I'm not interested in and just look at the pattern that I'm interested in. Then I can go through and say, oh, that pattern produced at this well, that pattern produced at this well, that pattern produced at this well.
Mhm.
And oh, look, there's some patterns out here that have no wells in them. So maybe that's a good target.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's how I'm using the machine learning to help me and my clients
Right.
find
Mhm.
oil and gas.
Wow.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah,
ladies?
it
yeah,
does.
absolutely.
No, it
When you
it
put it, when you
does.
put it in color, it's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. It's really nice that we were looking at this before and we were like,
What does that
We're
mean?
like,
Right, right.
Yeah.
So it's nice hearing you explain it all.
Well, and so here's a good example. This next example, you've all heard of the Eagleford, all the shale plays that are going on,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
Well, in the main part of where the Eagleford produces, you have what they call the Austin Chalk, and then you have the Eagleford Shale, and then below that they have what they call the Buda Lime. So the Austin Chalk and the Buda are those big hard pieces of earth that send a signal in one direction. It's called a peak. There are peak events.
Hmm.
And the poor little Eagleford is wedged between those two formations. And so it ends up being the soft rock or the trough. Okay. In where they're producing the Austin Chalk, and again it's in time, is about 30 milliseconds. So it's about 200 feet thick. Not very thick at all.
Mhm.
And they're trying to drill wells for long distances, staying
Mhm.
in that little piece. Now, this slide is showing that the Austin Chalk is broken out into 6 different layers, which are impossible to see
Right.
in regular seismic.
Mm-hmm.
But now we can break out the Austin Chalk and we can see all 6 layers. Only the 2 darkest red layers in the middle are where most of the oil and gas comes in the Austin Chalk. And so people can't normally see that,
Right.
but we can track it. So the next slide actually shows you everywhere in this map. And then we can go in with a client and calibrate their well information. We can show them where they missed the sweet spot completely
Yeah.
Mhm.
and they had a dry hole or a poor producer, or where they have a really good producer because their well stayed vertical in that sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So this becomes very important in the shale plays as
Mhm.
well, which before we could just see a trough,
Yeah.
and that's it. We couldn't break it out into its components and know where the juicy part is.
Right.
Mhm.
And so the next slide is really cool because here's a case where most of us would look at the seismic on the left-hand side and just map right through that low spot.
Mhm.
Okay? That's just a dip. That's just a dip in the earth. Well, the right-hand slide is showing that that low spot actually is a channel cut, and it's got different kind of rock filled inside of it.
Right.
Okay? So if you're drilling a horizontal well, that's called a geohazard, and you don't want to encounter that
Mhm.
because it'll mess up
That
your
is
well.
right there.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Oh wow.
That would be called a geohazard, and we try to avoid those.
What would happen if they?
Well, it could mess up the well. It could mess up the mud system. I mean, they would get through it, but it's one of those things that you like to avoid if you don't
Right.
if you don't
so
have
have
to drill.
more money.
But you couldn't
to-
see it.
Yeah.
Right.
You couldn't see it in the regular seismic. You wouldn't
Right.
know that it's an incised valley cut there.
Mhm.
So that's how we're applying the technology, and
That's
it
so
works
cool.
in limestones as well as it works in shales and sands. This next slide, I think, is an example. Yeah, that's an example. So here's what we've interpreted for years and years and years. This is the top of the Edwards Lime. Okay, so the Edwards in Austin, Texas, is the aquifer.
Okay.
That's where you're driving through Austin. You're going around 360 on the northeast side or northwest side of Austin, and you say entering Edwards Aquifer.
Mhm.
Well, at 15,000 feet, which is where this picture is taken from, it carries gas.
Huh.
And so this is a line that three wells have been drilled into this Edwards Lime. One in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one in the 80s. Two of the wells found good gas shows.
Mhm.
But in the 70s and 80s, they weren't interested in natural gas because the price was so cheap. They were looking for oil.
Yeah.
So they ended up plugging the wells because even though they had good
Huh.
gas shows.
Wow.
And then one well that was drilled in the 70s couldn't find anything. I mean, they didn't even have a whiff of gas.
Mhm.
So how do you tell where the reservoir is and where it's not when you just have one big orange line to look at?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay. So
Wow.
the machine learning.
It's so much more.
Well, what the machine learning does, and what's important here is you've got a big, deep rock that's full of gas. And that rock is at 15,000 feet below the surface of the earth. And it's a limestone, so it's fractured.
Mhm.
Okay. And over time, a little bit of that gas escapes into the rock above it.
Mhm.
So, what the machine learning is designed to do is look for subtle changes in rock properties of the subsurface. And you can see I've highlighted kind of a blue area there.
Mhm.
Okay. That is a signal where the gas has escaped into the shale above the Edwards.
Wow.
So, everywhere you see that blue, it's being charged from that pressured gas below it in the
Mhm.
rock. So, the next slide will actually show you all three wells. And where the blue is where you've got good porosity and good reservoir.
Mhm.
And
They
where the
just
dry hole
missed
is.
it.
Yeah.
Well, the next slide after that.
I feel like that would be very frustrating as the
Right.
whoever drilled that. Like you're just off.
Yeah, just-
Well, you're
Just
gonna
a
find out how
smidge.
just off. Okay, so here's a what we call a dip line. This is the Edwards. It's a reef. It's actually an old buried reef,
Wow.
and that's why the structure looks like that.
Mhm.
So if you look at where that well is drilled in conventional seismic, you can't see why it was a dry hole. But if you look at the blue and green, and that well is not in the blue or green, that's where it was tight. Okay, it's in kind of an orangey yellowy stuff, right?
Mhm.
If they had moved that well 400 feet north, they would have had a discovery.
I feel like I would
Wow.
throw
I know,
a
I'd be
seismic
done.
data and
I mean,
be like,
I'd be done.
400 feet. Well,
Mhm.
they didn't even have the 3D in this area
Right.
when they
Mhm.
drilled those wells.
Yeah.
This
Mhm.
3D was shot in the mid 90s.
Right.
Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so this is the major oil company well that was drilled in the 60s that had all the shows. Okay,
Mhm.
but in the 60s, gas was really cheap, and they were looking for oil. They didn't want
Right.
gas,
Mhm.
so they walked away from this well. If they had drilled 400 feet south, they would have missed it entirely.
Wow.
So here you have a dry hole that missed it by 400 feet. Here you have a well that had good shows that
Mhm.
missed being a dry hole by 400 feet.
It was
Right.
real wildcatting
Wow.
back then.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But that's just to show you how the technology has
Mhm.
changed the way we interpret what's in the
Yeah.
subsurface.
Yeah. Do
If-
you feel like the majority of companies nowadays are using machine learning?
No.
No?
Really?
How are they not?
Yeah.
Well, I ask myself that question all the
Right.
time, which as a consultant is one reason why I stay really busy.
Right.
Because when companies see what this can do for them,
Mm-hmm.
then they say, well, I don't want to take the time to learn how to do it. I'll just get Deborah. So I stay.
Mm.
I
Good
mean,
for
I've
you.
got. Well, it's
Yeah.
good for me, except as I'm getting older, maybe not work as much.
Mhm.
But I have a huge backlog of clientele
Right.
that have me doing this, especially the little guys. Maybe they only have 1 or 2 3Ds.
Mm-hmm.
Now the big companies, Shells, Exxons, they have research departments,
Right.
and I'm sure they have something similar
Mhm.
that they're
Mhm.
working on in their research departments.
Mhm.
But what I found over the years with the big companies is that a lot of time it never makes it out of research into the hands of
Interesting.
people who could actually use it.
Right.
It's
Wow.
they- because it's
they're
their
gatekeeping.
They're gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's their little world. So
Mhm.
anyway, and I think there's one more example in here where now we have machine learning that can automatically pick breaks in the earth. We call them faults.
Huh.
And around salt domes are the slow growth and pushing up of salt into rock. And as it pushes its way through the rock, it fractures the rock. Tends to be a radial type pattern
Mhm.
around the top of the
Mhm.
dome. So we can use machine learning instead of hand picking all the faults, which, compartmentalizes the oil and gas. Different
Mhm.
fault blocks may have oil and gas at different levels.
Mhm.
Now we can let the machine do it. And the next slide shows an example of, this is a project I got, and a consultant had worked on it for years, hand picking all the breaks in the earth that he saw.
Wow.
And he gave me the project that had 280 different hand-picked breaks of the earth. Okay.
Wow.
Hundreds of man hours to do that. Of course, he's
Mhm.
being paid by the hour, so it probably didn't bother him at all.
Yeah.
Right.
I was able to do the same work in 4 hours on my machine by letting the machine do it.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
So that's just an
Wow.
example of how I'm using this to find oil and gas.
I feel like this is
Mhm.
going to be a loaded question, but as we wrap up, I think I definitely want to know. Obviously, it's come a long way over the last few years. So, next 5 to 10 years, where do you see this even, progressing even further?
Well, of course, now we have 4-dimensional seismic. Okay.
What does that even mean?
Okay, so
What's the fourth dimension?
well, time is the 4th dimension. Okay, so you put your recording devices out over a big field that you've discovered, and you're producing from this field, and you just leave the recording devices out there. And every 6 months or so, you shoot a brand new 3D. And so over time, you can see the depletion of the oil and
Ah.
gas from the rocks.
Interesting.
So that's 4-dimensional. And I think that'll come into play more.
For sure.
And certainly I see advances in the machine learning aspect to where it becomes a household name.
Right.
I mean, it took a long time for people to get used to going from 2D to 3D,
Mhm.
mainly because of cost and technology. But now the technology for recording and processing and getting it into your hands, that's all gotten cheaper
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and faster.
Mhm.
So the same thing's going to happen with the machine learning and AI. I think that's our next revolution. Like I said earlier, the easy stuff has been found.
Right.
Mhm.
And so if we're going to keep on finding oil and gas and keeping the earth sustained in energy, then we're going to have to use better and better tools.
For sure.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
So we always
Wow.
end each episode with 3 rapid fire questions. Misty, you
Mhm.
want to take it
Sure.
away?
What, in your opinion, is the biggest misconception in the energy industry?
Another
that is a
I
loaded
know.
question. I think the biggest misconception in the energy industry is that we're destroying the earth. If you look at the lithium mines and the cobalt mines and the rare earth minerals that they're digging up and creating these huge cuts in the earth to get rare earth minerals to make batteries.
And
or
using
EV.
slave labor for that.
I didn't want to get in there. But yeah. And you look at that compared to drilling one natural gas well. And one good natural gas well can supply all the electricity that it would take to run 10,000 cars or 20,000 cars or more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the idea that we're ravaging and pillaging the earth is not being translated very well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think there needs to be more education around
Mhm.
where
Absolutely.
batteries are coming
Mhm.
Right.
from.
Right.
100%.
Well, one of the things that scares me is that we don't have enough students that are in STEM systems. We don't have enough math. We don't have enough science being taught in the schools. And for a long time, geology or earth science was part of the curriculum. It's been
Mhm.
removed.
Mm.
So
Has it
now,
really?
Wow.
yeah. So except in a few schools, a few
Wow.
districts.
Interesting.
So kids don't have a chance to learn about the earth and what goes on below it.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have an appreciation
Right.
for what we're doing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's sad.
It is
Mhm.
that.
Why should people care about energy?
Well, I mean, it keeps us alive, for
Right.
one.
Most importantly.
most importantly, we would be dragging knuckles in the sand and, hoping lightning would strike a forest fire so that we could cook some meat. I mean,
Spearing
Right.
any animal.
yeah. Well, I'm a hunter, so yeah. But no, I mean, energy is, and here's another misconception. People don't understand that everything that they use
Mm-hmm.
comes in some way or form from petroleum.
Mm-hmm. We talk about
To
it all
the
the
to the
time.
mascara you put on your eyelashes,
Yeah.
and the
Mhm.
lipstick, to the plastic that makes up the frames on your glasses. If you took away all the petroleum products, you would be dragging your knuckles in the sand,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
but naked.
Right. Because you wouldn't have
Exactly.
clothes.
That's
Exactly.
it. That's it.
The third one is the fun one.
Yes. In your career, what is the most embarrassing story, or what is your most embarrassing story?
Oh. Well, I try not to embarrass myself. Trying to think, 47 years in the industry. I've had some embarrassing moments, that's for darn sure. I think I was giving a presentation one time and said a very bad word because something went wrong with the projection system. Back in the days when we had little slides.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we had a carousel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They get stuck or something like that.
Mhm.
It's a time presentation and you're trying to get through everything. And sometimes just bad things slip out.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
I get it.
Mhm.
Again, we couldn't edit live programming.
Right. Right. Exactly.
That's funny.
I love
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was honestly
So knowledgeable.
informative, and
Wow.
I feel like I learned so much and can now look at your slides and be like, okay, that
Yeah.
makes
Makes
sense
sense.
now.
Mhm.
I love that.
We
And
should have
will-
recorded ourselves trying to look at them before
Right.
we started.
We definitely should.
It was bad.
Maybe we should record Jules
Yeah.
looking at it through
That's a
Crystal.
good
We'll
idea.
have everyone
Well,
in our
now
office
that you look
take a
at it,
look.
then you can see what's going on. There's one more
Mhm.
slide we didn't get to,
Oh,
but so I
Oh, wow.
take the fault information
Mhm.
and I can combine it with the other attributes to see faulting and
In one.
in one swoop. So now I can see the
Mm.
stratigraphic layers along with where the earth is broken.
That's insane.
That is.
So now
Very
that you
cool.
understand how the slides
Yeah.
work, then you can go over them and look at them and stuff.
Yeah.
So-
yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Where can people find you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
LinkedIn.
Well, yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's kind of how I found you guys,
Yeah.
actually.
Mhm.
And I've had the same email, can believe it or not, for 30 years. It's dsacrey, SACREY, at auburnenergy.com.
We
All
can
one
put
word.
that in the
Mhm.
show notes.
We
and
will.
all the
Yeah.
things so people can find.
I don't like texting. I'm still the old-fashioned kind.
That's okay.
I don't want to wear my thumbs out. But certainly email
Cool.
I respond to very well.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you
Awesome.
again.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thank
Come
you.
back
This
and
was
visit
fun.
anytime.
Absolutely. Well, you just tell me what next topic you want, and
Yeah.
and I'll
Yes.
come up
Yeah,
with something.
We will.
Yeah, we need to get you on the what's it called? Energy Bites.
Yes.
Ooh,
That would
that's
be
a
a
good
fun
data
one.
one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mhm.
All right.
Like and subscribe.